Hi and welcome to this video in the MRDCL Understanding Concept series. And in this video, I'm going to be looking at using insert files and setting parameters for automation. So let's just look at the very basics of what an insert file is. And conceptually, it's very simple what an insert file is. If we open up this run here called run.stp, you can see that it's comprised of some code at the top and then 5 lots of inserted statements. So it's inserting the demographics, it's inserting section 1, section 2, banner and tables. So effectively all that's happening when you run MRDCL is it's going to take the code in these files here. If there's no file extension, it will assume it's a .stp file. And it will just, if you like, load that in and run it as though it's just one file. So at this level, insert files are really just about organization. They're just allowing you to construct your scripts so that you can keep chunks of script in tidy segments or tidy parts so that it's perhaps easier to manage, or indeed perhaps so that more than one person can work on different parts of the script at the same time. So there are some good reasons for using insert files this way, but we're going to go on as well in a little while and look at how you can set some parameters so that they actually drive something within the insert file and do really much more clever things and actually give you opportunities to automate processes, have common code that you use. Let's start then with the basics. So here I've got inserting demographics, section 1, section 2, banner and table. So let's take a quick look at those files. If I open up each of those one at a time, you will see that demographics was the first one, and you can see here just in a tidy file I've got some very simple code here which are my demographics. So it's really just for organization at this point. And the same will apply here. If I open up section 1, you can see I've got some code here which applies to section 1, and there we have some more code that it's going to load in a tidy way. And you can see the banner is also set up that way. I skipped section 2 there, but there's the banner. We might have several different banners in there. And finally we come to the tables, and you can see we've got some fairly standard tables here. Select banner is banner, and adding in the tables that we want from these variables. Now if we were to run that, we can just compile that. I haven't actually got any data here, so this is a compilation only, and we look at the listing file. You can see that all gets put together into one file, so that it's as though we had all that script in one file, because the insert statements there are putting it all together. And there you can see the demographics first of all, the code from section 1, the code that I didn't actually show from section 2, before it eventually scrolls down here, and here we go. Here's the banner and the tables that you saw briefly in tables.stp. So all we've looked at so far really is, if you like, organizational things. So let's go a little bit further now and see what else we can do. Let's go back to section 2, and you can see we've got a little bit more, a little step up if you like here. So if we look at the script here, you can see that we have a data statement which are statements for a series of rating scales. So that's data 100. There's now a loop which processes 1 to 6. So if you're not familiar with the preprocessor it's using here, it's probably a good idea to understand the basics of the preprocessor before you go too much further through this video. So we've got a loop here of 1 to 6, and it's picking up the variables that come from that. And then you can see some use of an insert file here within a do loop. Now what this is doing, if we look at this particular rated scale, it's going to put in the text automatically for a rating scale that goes from very good to very poor. And I've called that STP file VG-VP. Whereas when we come to the next rating scale, which uses data statement 200 with 4 statements, you can see here I've inserted ASDS, which is inserting some common script for agree strongly to disagree strongly. So rather than having to re-enter code that we might be using not just on this project, but perhaps on a whole multitude of projects and colleagues using on different projects, I've got some standard script in here that I can just load in. Now, it's quite possible if you had these standard scripts that you'll keep these in some common area on your server, z:\vg-vp, for example, so that anyone can access those and use them within their script. But what it means, if we just go back and shut this temporarily and open up, have a quick look at vgvp.stp, you can see this is fairly simple piece of script, but why type it on every single project when it's probably needed on many different projects and probably with scores of 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 applied and so on. So if you've got chunks of script that you genuinely want on multiple projects or colleagues want to share, you can have these sitting in a common location that everybody can access, and you haven't got to type it in and remember to put in all the syntax that requires. So agree strongly there to disagree strongly, scored 2 to -2 in a common area. So that's a sort of use of insert files for text or code that you want to enter perhaps more than once within one project, or perhaps across many different projects. So that's a sort of one step up from what I showed you initially. And that can apply to things like demographics. If you've got things like age, where you've got perhaps 5 or 6 different age bands that you use on most or all projects, you could just insert that in the same way and it would automate everything. So let's go now to the next level up, and now that's setting, if you like, some parameters so that we can start to automate some script. And what I want to introduce you to now is some code in the table stage of this script, which I didn't really highlight before. And what you can see here, well, first of all, I showed you just now those sort of standard tables that you might just key in as normal in tables.stp. But here you can see I've got, for the rating scales, 2 lines of code for each of the 2 rating scales, which were called sec2_q1 and sec2_q2. And what I'm doing is I'm feeding in some parameters here that are going to do something for me in ratings.stp. What this means is that on different projects, or many times within the same project, if I want to, I can set a list of parameters and then include some code that gets driven by the parameters in that statement there called parameters. What it means afterwards, and I can reuse it or reset those parameters and just call the same code again. Now let's see what that's going to generate for me. If we look at the listing file again and go down to that code, it's near the bottom. So what it's actually doing for me here is it's doing a couple of things. So if we look at this, you can see what it's doing. This is the code that it's generating. It's actually making some variables that are adding a top 2 box. So you can see it's picking up sec2_q1_1, adding in a 1 to 2, and then picking up the variable as it stood and adding in the text top 2 box, pulling in the same title. Then it's making another variable for the second rating statement, pulling in the summary code for that for the top 2 box, and so on. And then eventually it produces a table for each of those 6 statements with a top 2 box included. And after that, it goes on and makes a summary table with each of the columns side by side. So it's quite a clever little insert file, this, but let's look at a little bit at what code is behind that. Now, if we just close that and open up ratings.stp, we can see here that what's been documented at the top here with exclamation marks to make them comments is a definition or a specification of what the parameters mean and what the parameters that have to be set actually do. So the first parameter we've called here is the root variable name. The second parameter is the number of statements. The third parameter is the data statement that contains the text. The fourth is the banner that we want to run the tables by. The fifth has two settings, 1 if you want a top 2 box, 0 if you want no top 2 box. The sixth parameter is 1 means you want a summary table and 0 means you don't want a summary table. And finally, the seventh one is to actually give it a title for the summary table. So what's happening here, if we go back to the parameters that were set, so let's just do that. Let's open up the tables again. And here you can see those parameters being set. So the root variable name is sec2 underscore q1. So that's the sort of root variable name. That's going to, as you can see from the code above here, going to pick up underscore 1, underscore 2, underscore 3. And it's going to pick up 6 of those because we've set it to 6 here. It's getting the text from those from data statement 100. You may remember in section 2 there was a data statement 100. The banner's going to be gender. And then we've got those two parameters. So the first one, 1 meant we want a top 2 box, 0 meant we didn't want a top 2 box. 1 here means that we want a summary table as well, and the title of that summary table is section 2 Q1 summary. And then the insert ratings gets driven by the parameters that are set in those 7 parameters in the data statement called parameters. Now the second time it's called, you can see the root variable this time is sec2 underscore q2. You may recall there's 4 statements. The data statement with the text is 200. The banner we want is age, but we don't want a top 2 box and we don't want a summary table. So as we don't want a summary table, it doesn't need a title in here. And of course, that's then going to drive the ratings. Let's look at that and just check that's doing what we expect. Let's go back to the listing file. Let's go to the bottom here of the file. And you can see then, just quickly going over again what we did just now. So it's building variables with a top 2 box for question sec2 question 1, and then doing a table using that. Then it's doing the summary table here for sec2 q1. But for the other one, it's not building any top 2 box, and it's not doing a summary table because we set those parameters 0, and it's analyzing this one by age. I think the previous one we chose to analyze by gender. We could have used the banner, of course. But you can see what's happening here. This is automating some common script that we're driving with parameters that are sitting inside a data statement. So let's explore what's happening inside that piece of script to make sure we understand that. So what ratings.stp is doing. Now this looks quite complex to read at first. It's certainly a good idea to document what all these parameters do. But you can see what's happening now is there's a line of code here that's setting a value of statements to the value in parameters.to. So that's picking up the second item. You'll remember that that was 6 statements for sec2 underscore q1 and 4 statements for sec2 underscore q2. Then the top 2 is being picked up from the 5th parameter. Remember that was set to 1 or 0. The summary, whether a summary table was required, was set from the 6th parameter as 1 or 0. And now we come to the script that's getting driven by those parameters. So we're saying skip 99 if top 2 is not equal to 1. So if we don't want a top 2 box table, it'll just skip it. If we do want a top 2 box variable and table, we're going to loop round the statements and make a variable called v underscore whatever the variable name was and pick up that top 2 box. And of course you could extend this to have a bottom 2 box as well, a top 2 box and a bottom 2 box, whatever you wanted. you could plug that in and add that. And that's really one of the beauties of this automation technique, is that you can just plug in more and more settings into here and make it do more alternative or different things that you want it to do, all within one STP file called ratings.stp. And as long as you document what those parameters are, that should be really straightforward. Then you can see I pull in the text top 2 box if we want the top 2 box variable, and it's picking up the same title as it had before because the title actually doesn't change. That's exactly the same. Then we come to the tables. So it's doing the tables, and you can see what's happening here is if we don't want a top 2 box, we skip the v underscore, we just use the regular variable. But if it did want a top 2 box, we want the v underscore table. And a similar process for the summary table. If we don't want the summary table, if it's set to 0, we're going to skip to 999, which is right down here. If we do want a summary table, we're going to build a variable. We're going to set up H labels, horizontal labels for that, for the dummy table. We're going to specify that dummy table, give it the title that's in parameter 7, and loop round and put our statement side by side. So this is a very powerful way of using MRDCL to use bits of code that you want to reuse and drive it with parameters. At the outset, we just looked at using insert files just for tidiness, and then we looked at stepping it up one step further, how we could use common sets of script. But this is really now automating script. If you find this interesting, you can take this yet another step further. There's a technique within MRDCL called EPS, which stands for Excel Productivity Scripting, where you actually put this into templates in Excel and have an even more powerful way of automating different bits of script and different types of analysis and variables, data corrections and things that you want to do. But that's all covered in our EPS videos, which I'd commend you to watch, because that just extends what you're seeing here even further, and actually making it into an environment that's a little bit more friendly, I think, because when you use this in parameters, you've got to remember what the data statements are, whereas when you do it all within EPS, you can have it all very nicely documented, and you have some extra facilities like using your own names and drivers for different outputs that you might want to achieve. So thank you for joining me in this video. I hope you found it useful, and do watch those EPS videos, because they can really take it yet a step further once you've understood the concepts within this. Thank you.